All right, everyone, hello and welcome in. For the second straight day, the Minnesota Vikings continue on with their training camp program for the 2021 regular season. And for the second straight day here at Skull Ohio, we're going to be talking about the position preview series, where we talk about all of the positional groups for the Minnesota Vikings leading into the 2021 regular season. Yesterday, we talked about the offensive line in depth. Today, we're going to have a discussion surrounding the quarterback position, and this is mostly going to be a conversation about Kirk Cousins, go figure, because there's just not as many players to talk about. We'll still try to go in depth, but this probably won't be as long of an episode as it was yesterday. So, as stated previously, this is going to be a large conversation about Kirk Cousins because he is the primary focal point of this positional group. We will go over the starter himself, Kirk Cousins, the backups, and then at the end we will talk about a few storylines that I think we need to pay attention to for training camp and the regular season itself. So when it comes to the quarterback position for the Minnesota Vikings, let's be honest and get this out of the way. This has been a hot button topic ever since Kirk Cousins arrived in Minnesota for the 2018 season. And everybody has their own opinions and problems with Kirk Cousins. It seems rather divided that we are in two camps where you are either a Kirk Cousins stan or you are a Kirk Cousins detractor. There doesn't seem to be too much of a middle ground for Minnesota Vikings fans, at least these days. And I think as time goes on, we sort of splinter into those groups more and more, and there continues to be a decrease in the number of people who are in the middle. And I think that there's very little overlap, if I could put it that way, because depending on how the season's going, he's either driving you crazy or he's doing very well and you're very excited. So it's a very polarizing topic, and we will get to that today. That will be most of today's discussion. So let's flip over the slide and let's talk about the quarterbacks that we do have on the roster heading into the 2021 season as of right now. And I stress as of right now because that's going to be a point that we're going to make later on in the video. So the starter is Kirk Cousins. I don't care who they drafted this year. I don't care who they almost drafted this year. I don't care what free agents were available, what trade rumors were out there. Kirk Cousins is the guy, and he's going to be the guy until he's no longer the guy. And I know that's kind of a weird way of saying it, but there is no scenario that I envision where he's going to get benched in favor of Kellen Mond this year, because it would just have to be an absolute unmitigated disaster of a regular season for Kirk Cousins to lose playing time to a rookie quarterback. That doesn't strike me as a scenario that Mike Zimmer is going to entertain in the slightest. So Kirk Cousins is the guy. He's going to be the starter for the 2021 season. And I think most of the offensive production is going to depend on how well he manages his way through this team compared to last year. So as for Kirk Cousins, his 2020 season, statistically, it was very good on paper. 4,265 yards passing, 35 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, finished with a passer rating of 105. You look at that stat sheet and you're like, wow, this team must have been great last year. We missed the playoffs. We had a losing record, we went 7-9. Yeah, we went 7-9, had a losing record last year, and it didn't feel very good for most of the season. And we played some teams poorly that we shouldn't have, i.e. Dallas. The Carolina Panthers game was too close. And really what it boils down to is we got ourselves into a hole too early. And Kirk Cousins' first half of the season, if you split the statistics up that way, then you get a better picture and some better context of what went on in 2020. So for the first 10, or not the first 10, excuse me, I believe it was the first 6 games for Kirk Cousins were not very good, and some of them were worse than others. The Indianapolis Colts game was really just a complete disaster from start to finish. The Atlanta Falcons game in the first half was a disaster because he threw 3 first-half interceptions against the Falcons. That hole was too big to dig themselves out of in the second half. There was even some internet discussion on Twitter, social media, about potentially benching him that game for Sean Mannion, but really at that point, what's the point in putting in Sean Mannion? I don't really think that that's going to do anything like give the team a boost or make anybody interested in that game. So he had to continue playing no matter what, because that was the position that the Vikings were in. But either way, the first 6 games of the season for the 2020 year for Kirk Cousins were not good. He finished with 9 touchdowns and was either in the lead or tied for the lead with interceptions with 10 in the first 6 games. Then they go to the bye week. They come back versus the Green Bay Packers. It becomes the Dalvin Cook show for a little while. The offense figures itself out, and then Kirk Cousins has a very, very solid second half of the season, finishing with 24 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions along the way. There were some games, most notably the the Detroit Lions game at the end of the season that meant nothing in terms of wins and losses, and he was able to pad his stats a little bit. So without that game, he finishes below 4,000 yards passing. Just throwing that out there, not trying to take away from what he accomplished last year, but there is a possibility that it could have been worse. But either way, have to give him credit for stepping up at the second half of last year after what was a terrible start. So they didn't just totally phone it in for the rest of the season, and they were able to make a desperate run for the playoffs, even though it probably would have been in the better interest of the organization to finish that season with a worse record, get a better draft pick, because Justin Fields was drafted just a handful of spots ahead of them. So, but it is what it is at this point. No reason to relitigate the 2020 season just to provide context. I think the biggest problem myself, and I can't speak for everyone else, but the biggest problem for me with Kirk Cousins is the contract, and it's been that way since 2018, because when I first heard the phrase 84 million guaranteed, I was like, what are we doing? Are we sure about this? Is this going to produce results? Statistically, in terms of individual performance, yeah, it has. I think Kirk Cousins has put up some very good statistics that has made him worth those paychecks. We just don't see it in the win column, because he's basically been a 500 quarterback his entire career. And then we've had two very disappointing seasons with him at the helm. The 2019 season was good, but a one and done in the playoffs isn't really what you're shooting for. That's an improvement on the previous year, but it's not the goal. I think what bothered me the most, and I'm going to speak, sort of in an editorial sense right here. What bothered me the most about Kirk Cousins was the initial signing, $84 million guaranteed. And then the end of the 2018 season, when they lose to the Chicago Bears, they finish the season, I believe, 8-7-1. And the post-game press conference that Kirk Cousins had, it just made me feel like he just wasn't into it, or there was just too many excuses or something about it. But he said something along the lines of like, look, guys, it's okay. This is year one. We still have to develop code words and all these other ins and outs, and gel as a team. And then we're going to get a lot better, and things are going to improve. And I just thought, man, that seems like such a lazy way to write off how disappointing the season was when you were brought in to be the guy to bring a championship to Minnesota. That press conference rubbed me the wrong way. And people can, tell me that I'm wrong. It's fine. But I'm just sharing with you my experience and why I feel the way that I do about Kirk Cousins as the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. In 2021, his salary cap hit will be $31 million. Rick Spielman and company have done a good job getting around that. Currently, they have $13 million in cap space, and they brought in a lot of free agents, albeit on one-year deals, but the rest of the league is sort of operating in the same manner. Next year is going to be a problem. The 2022 salary cap hit for Kirk Cousins is $45 million. And that's part of the reason, as I said, the contract's been a problem, because he gets paid as one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And I think statistically, he's very, very good. But is he like top five, as far as contracts go? I don't know. And honestly, I don't think so. Just to sort of give you a positive and negative approach, a pros and cons approach to Kirk Cousins as a starting quarterback, so that I'm not so negative, we'll throw in some pros here. Things I like about Kirk Cousins, he doesn't get hurt. He plays in all of his games. There's no long stretch of time where he misses games. Hopefully, knock on wood that continues. He's great with play action, and that's very good for a run-first team. With Dalvin Cook, they have to respect the run, so play action pass is what he's good at. He puts up big numbers. We've already talked about that. Is he starting to get more comfortable in the run game? Will he run a little bit more? We saw some of that at the end of last season. And does he have a better O-line now? With improved pass protection, do those really good numbers become super really good numbers, if I could put it that way? Because if that's what happens, and he starts entering this, MVP candidate talk, then I would be like, okay, I don't care about the contract no more. You're putting your money where your mouth is and outperforming to where you should be. Negatives, some of which we've talked about. I think he lacks leadership traits. I think he's frustratingly pragmatic in the sense that he's robotic, and sometimes it feels like he needs everything to go smoothly in order for him to operate at a functional capacity. That's just an observational thing that I have. And then he's obviously not freakishly athletic. Is he starting to get more involved in the run game? Maybe, he's more willing to take off and scamper for a few yards. Is it his, primary, secondary, or even, the third thing on his list? No, most likely not. So in a nutshell, Kirk Cousins, I think, is a very, very, very good starting quarterback. I'm glad he's the starting quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. It could be a lot worse. I just hope that it gets a lot better than what we saw at the beginning of 2020, especially. As far as the backups go, Kellen Mond is your rookie this year, the third-round pick from Texas A&M. I'm getting big-time baby steps vibes, as an approach with him for the Vikings as an organization so far. They're very hesitant to really, I think, bring him along at any other speed other than slow. Because number one, I don't think they want to put pressure on Kirk Cousins with somebody looking over, with him looking over his shoulder as a potential replacement. And then two, I don't think they want to, move him along too quickly and ruin him in his rookie season. So I think it's going to be a very wait and see approach with Kellen Mond. Then you have your two traditional practice squad members, the Vikings, on the roster, Jake Browning and Nate Stanley. Nate Stanley, in my notes, I just wrote practice squad. I think that's what he's destined for. Jake Browning, here's your chance to compete. You've been on the practice squad with the Vikings for a few years now. Here is your opportunity to win the backup job for the Minnesota Vikings, because all you have to do is beat out a third-round rookie who the organization might want to be taking very slowly and could wind up just making quarterback 3 on the depth chart. So I think for Jake Browning, this is really your time to shine. This is your training camp. This is your preseason. Let's see what you do with it. Do I have high expectations for that? No. Could I be surprised? Yes, absolutely. All right, so let's switch the slide and talk about the storylines that we should be focused on for the rest of the offseason and the regular season itself. Number one, we already talked about it a little bit briefly, is the quarterback 2 battle. Who's going to win that job for Nate Stanley? Thank you for participating, but I don't think that you have a shot really against these other two. Jake Browning and Kellen Mond, it's going to come down to them depending on how things go. Kellen Mond has turned some heads so far in the early days of training camp with some of his passes, through a nice touchdown to Amir Smith-Marset in the first day, but of course that would have ended up in a strip stack probably because Janarius Robinson was right there. But it's practice, it's training camp, you can't hit the quarterback. It is what it is. Today, Kirk Cousins has looked very good in training camp, throwing some deep balls, completed a touchdown pass over Cam Dantzler and Patrick Peterson down the middle. So from everything that we're seeing so far in the early days of training camp, it looks like Kirk Cousins is doing his thing. It's just all going to come down to who looks good enough to be his backup. The second storyline, or what to watch for, would be, could this team potentially sign a veteran before the start of the regular season? What if Kellen Mond is just not ready and they don't trust him, and then Jake Browning just has a god-awful performance? Obviously, you're not going to elevate Nate Stanley. I don't think he really has an opportunity there, at least not a fair opportunity. There's going to be cuts along the way over the course of the next month. Could a veteran quarterback find his way to the waiver wire? The Minnesota Vikings would be intrigued to bring in as a added security backup for Kirk Cousins if Kellen Mond and Jake Browning aren't up to snuff at the early portions of this season. And last but not least, Cousins' start versus his 2020 start. It has to be a lot better. They can't dig themselves into these gigantic holes and try to play from behind for most of the second half. We saw it in the Green Bay game, the Indianapolis Colts game, the Atlanta Falcons game. The Seattle game is an enigma. We just had one bad third quarter. It is what it is. But as far as Kirk Cousins getting off to a good start in both the first half of the schedule and the first half of games, we need to see him play a complete season. All 16 games where he is just as good as he was in the second half of 2020 throughout the course of the regular season. I think getting off to a strong start is good for both him, fans that may be too critical of him, and the Minnesota Vikings and their chances to get to the playoffs. So that's going to do it for this position preview. We ended up going a little bit longer than I thought we would, but there was a lot to talk about, even if it's just for 4 players. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What are your thoughts on Kirk Cousins? We discussed him at length on this channel. I think I know what most of you are going to say and have to say about him. This is a friendly place. If you are pro Kirk Cousins, that's totally fine. I can see why you would be that. If you are anti Kirk Cousins, again, totally fine. I can see why you would be that. I'm one of those rare people who are in the middle. Even though I have called for the benching of Kirk Cousins in the past, I will own up to that. You can go watch that video. It's in the 2020 regular season playlist. I'm against the contract, and just, I don't think he has like the intangibles, like you see Tom Brady in the Super Bowl saying, let's go, challenging defensive players on the other team between plays. I don't see Kirk Cousins doing stuff like that. I just don't know that he has those qualities to him. Let me know what you think about Kellen Mond. How prepared are you to see him this season at any point? And Jake Browning and Nate Stanley as well. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next one.